test is in 4-part, Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, and Part 4. Now look at Part 1.
Part 1.
You are about to hear a telephone conversation between a man and a woman about a rental property. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 7. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 7.
Central Realty, Jill speaking. How can I help you?
Yes, hello, Jill. I've got a problem, a complaint I wish to register. Who should I speak to?
You'll want to speak to Tracy, the residential manager. Just a moment and I'll put you through.
Thanks.
Hello, this is Tracy. I understand your rent is going to be increased.
Yes, this is why I'm calling. I was told that my rent would not be increased for the length of my 6-month contract, which I signed only 4 months ago. What's going on? Is my landlord allowed to do this?
I see. Yes. Okay. That seems strange. Look, can I take down some of your particulars and I'll register a formal complaint to the landlord on your behalf?
Yes, sure, that'd be good.
Firstly, name and address, contact details.
Yes, Jane McSweeney. That's McSweeny. 3 Mauger Street. That's Maugher Street. Windory, 3355.
And the phone there?
Yes, you can contact me on 334756 extension 3176. I generally arrive home by 6 o'clock in the evening, so you can call me around that time, but not after 9. Oh, sorry, 8:30, because that's the time I leave for work.
Okay, so I should note down that the problem is that your landlord wants to raise your rent. And when did you first move in?
Yes, well, the contract began on August 1st, and... oh, hang on. Sorry, that's the ending date. We actually moved in on February the 1st.
Before you listen to the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 8 to 10. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 8 to 10.
Okay. Good. Now, if need be, you will have to send a letter to the Rental Tenancy Board. But as I said, first let us approach your landlord on your behalf and see if we can work out the problem before it gets to that situation. I'd be very surprised if you have to send a letter. 95% of these kinds of problems get solved early on.
Okay.
Now, if you have any problems you need to discuss, feel free to come in and talk with the general manager. In the meantime, if you would just wait until we receive an answer from your landlord, we'll be able to then plan our next step.
Is there anything else I could be doing?
Well, you could write a letter to the RTB listing all the events as they happened from your point of view. But as I say, hold on to it. Don't send it unless we have to. Well, that's about it for now. Thanks for your call. I'm sure we can sort this out.
Thanks very much for your help. I hope we can sort it out too. Bye for now.
Yes, bye.
That is the end of Part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to Part 2.
Part 2. Everyone knows that we have achieved a huge amount in terms of space exploration.
First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 16. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 16.
Everyone knows that we have achieved a huge amount in terms of space exploration. The space race between ourselves and Russia went on for nearly 20 years, but we were the first to land a man on the moon. At that time, the space race was very close, and the Russians very nearly got to the moon before us. For me, the most exciting invention, and the invention that really showed we were ahead in the space race, was the reusable space shuttle. It was first successful in 1981 and has since been used on many missions. The reusable shuttle can carry astronauts on space missions and can serve as a laboratory in which to conduct experiments. It can be used to transport equipment to space stations or to collect or repair satellites. The shuttle carries between 5 and 7 crew members. When a mission is complete, the shuttle fires thrusters, which propel it back into the Earth's atmosphere. It then glides down to make its landing.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 17 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 17 to 20.
Although the remains of very early ovens have been found in many parts of the world, it was here that they were first used frequently in people's homes. In ancient Greece and in other parts of Europe and Turkey, people used ovens to bake bread. But it seems there was only one large oven that everyone shared. Here the remains of villages from 5,000 years ago show that each mud brick house was constructed with an oven, and that baking bread and perhaps cooking meat was very common. The ovens were made of clay and shaped like a beehive. Inside they had shelves, so that a number of loaves could be cooked together, and an opening at the bottom from which ash could be removed.
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3. Part 3.
The next important development in how history is recorded came with print.
First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 25.
The next important development in how history is recorded came with print. In the 8th century, the Chinese invented paper and woodblock printing. Remember that up to this time, very few people could read and write, and so only a very small number of people could understand written history. Suddenly, many books appeared, and many more people learnt to read. In the 14th century, the first printing press was invented in Germany. This reduced how long it took to produce books. The new printing technique quickly spread to other parts of the world. More books appeared, and even more people learnt to read. The first printed newspaper appeared in 1605, and the first daily newspaper in 1702. Now, people could read news stories soon after the event happened, and every event was recorded and stored. The problem with newspaper history is that newspaper reporters could tell the stories they wanted to tell, and not necessarily the truth. Photography was the next important development. We generally agree that photography was born in 1839. Some of the earliest photographs that the public saw were images of the American Civil War.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 26 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 26 to 30.
People were shocked by the photographs of dead soldiers, and for the first time saw the reality of war. By 1850, photographs appeared regularly in newspapers, and people now expected the truth. At the end of the 19th century came the first motion picture camera. Soon, history was being recorded as moving images. In the 1930s, television brought moving images into people's homes. More and more people saw history as it happened, and more history was recorded. Today, of course, we expect that every event in the world is recorded. Satellite TV and the Internet allow people to watch any event, anywhere in the world, as it happens. It doesn't matter if the TV cameras are not there. People carry around mobile phones and can record any incident and then share it online. Families have their own video cameras and record their own history. Children now grow up watching their parents and grandparents on film. I'm sure you'll agree that the transition from storytelling to what we have today has been dramatic, and I hope that...
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
Part 4.
You will hear a lecture on time. First, you will have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40. The subject of this series of lectures is horology, the science of measuring time, and we'll be looking at a few basic concepts in this lecture. The measurement of time has come a long way since ancient times. It began with such devices as the sundial, where the position of the sun's shadow marked the hour. Daylight was divided into 12 temporary hours. These temporary hours were longer in the summer and shorter in the winter, simply because the amount of daylight changes with the seasons. The earliest sundial we know comes from Egypt. It was made of stone and is thought to date from 1500 BC. Sundials were used throughout the classical world and, with time, evolved into more elaborate devices that could take into account seasonal changes and geographical positioning and reflect the hours accurately, no matter what the time of year. This was quite an achievement in technology. Today, sundials can be seen as decorative pieces in many gardens. In the 11th century, the Chinese invented the first mechanical clocks. They were large and expensive, and certainly not intended for individuals. However, this is the type of clock we are familiar with today. There have been many developments in clocks and watches since then, and they have been greatly improved. But if your clock or watch makes a ticking sound, then it could well be based on the mechanical movements the Chinese developed 1,000 years ago. However, timekeeping has moved on from the mechanical clock. Time has become so important that there is a series of atomic clocks around the world which measure international atomic time. Even though many countries have their own calendars, globalization has made it essential that we measure time uniformly. That we know, for example, that when it's 6 a.m. in the United Kingdom, it's 2 p.m. in Beijing. This standard was set in 1958. Now these atomic clocks are situated in over 70 laboratories all over the world. There is so much to cover about the development of time measurement that I would like to refer you to the reading list. The core text is The Development of Time, Theory and Practice, but there are many other useful texts. A good grounding in the subject is given in Understanding Time by J.R. Beale. Although some sections lack detailed analyses, it does offer a good foundation. Also, Time, Concepts and Conventions is quite a useful read. You might think from the title that it's about the philosophy of time, but this isn't the case. Rather, it gives a good description of how different countries have different approaches to time in terms of calendars and days. Lastly, The Story of Time by David Harris analyses time in great detail, and I would recommend this book if you are aiming to specialize in horology. Now, we're going to continue with an in-depth look at lunar and solar cycles.
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers. That is the end of the test. You now have 10 minutes to transfer your answers to your Ielts listening answer sheet.